Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Gamecock Central Radio. Emerson Phillips with Radi Nabulsi from UGAsports.com. Radi's going to give us the Georgia Bulldog perspective today. We've got a 3:30 kickoff national TV ball game on CBS Saturday in Athens, Georgia. And, Radi, I'll tell you what, this game turned out to be a lot more important from a standing standpoint than I think a lot of Gamecock fans in particular probably would have thought going into the season, and probably Georgia fans too, eh, Radi?
It's true, because if you go back over the years, about this time of the season, Georgia, and I know sometimes South Carolina, but very often Georgia is looking at one other team to lose and doing some really interesting bulldog calculus, if you will. There's been times where they needed Florida to lose one, Tennessee to win one, Kentucky to lose here, South Carolina to lose there, because Georgia's sitting like second or third in the SEC East rankings. And right now, Georgia's in control of its destiny for the first time in, maybe 5 years. So this is a big game for Georgia, and they're going to treat it as such.
Radi, Will Muschamp had his Tuesday press conference today, and he talked about Georgia at that presser, and he said that Georgia is an explosive team that's been dominant this year, and Georgia really has been steamrolling people. Just the one close game all year, a 1-point win at Notre Dame, and there's a good chance that Georgia's going to be number one in the college football playoff rankings, which come out tonight. I know that's a big talking point in Athens right now.
It is amongst the fans. The team won't talk about it. They pretend that they haven't seen it. We've had a bunch of players tell us, well, I don't even have cable. I only watch Netflix. And I didn't know that Georgia was ranked number 2 until you told us that. And I get that they're supposed to say stuff like that. I don't believe it for a second. I'm pretty sure every member of that Bulldogs roster knows exactly where they are in the rankings and what this game will mean to them. And while they won't pay a whole lot of attention to the college football playoff rankings, because, lose this weekend, it doesn't matter. So they'll be curious to see if they pop out 1 or 2. But amongst the fans, it's a lot of talk. Georgia has played a bunch of bad teams, except for Notre Dame. And actually, I thought Notre Dame was overrated at the beginning of the season, but they've done rather well. And right now, Georgia has, amongst the undefeated teams, probably has the best win, beating Notre Dame at Notre Dame even though it was by 1 point. It was a game that, Georgia started a true freshman at quarterback and had 12 different penalties. They could have won that game a lot easier. They made it tough on themselves, but they've the offense is night and day compared to what it was last year. They're averaging 38 points a game. They're holding opponents to under 12 points a game. So even though they've played a bunch of bad teams, they have a similar fashion to Alabama. They've demolished those teams. I'm a little surprised at the line this week. I don't expect Georgia to cover 24 or 26, whatever it is, against South Carolina, just because I'm not an idiot. I've seen this game played out many times. It's always much closer than everyone thinks it's going to be. But right now, a lot of fans are very excited about where Georgia stands, and they're expecting Georgia to keep carrying on and keep beating teams like they have been. I just think the second part of the season, it gets a lot tougher. The remaining 4 games are a lot tougher than the first 8.
All right, Georgia's got at Auburn next week, and they got a home game with Kentucky the week after that. And they still got Georgia Tech to play, and of course,
exactly.
South Carolina this weekend at home for the Dogs. So, Radi, Georgia just trucked Florida in the cocktail party down in Jacksonville, and I was reading a story on your site, UGAsports.com, about historically, or since the Vince Dooley era, how many times Georgia has had a game where they only threw 13 or fewer passes, and there have only been 5 games. All 5 were Georgia wins, and the Dogs threw only 7 passes on Saturday and just beat the breath out of Florida.
Yeah, if you go back to those games, if you look at the flip side of that, it's not that Georgia can't throw, it's just Georgia didn't need to. And going into that contest with Florida, I expected Florida to put up a much tougher fight because they have a very good front 7, and they knew that Georgia wanted to run the ball. And about that second half, when Florida started coming back, they sort of took away the run. But all of a sudden, Georgia just shifted to a second gear, and still, despite the fact that Florida was loading up the box, they ran at will. I mean, they only ran 42 plays. So it's not like Georgia was that's also a record. I don't think there's been a game since the mid-'70s in which Georgia has run that few number of plays. But they also scored 42 points. So it was just peak efficiency. I don't know that Georgia will ever be able to do that again. But you don't need to throw it when you're picking up, like Sonny Michel was averaging 28 yards a carry. So why throw it? It would actually drop your average to throw the ball instead of actually handing it to Sonny Michel.
Okay, that brings me to my next question for you, Roddy. Is there any chance that Georgia tries to get cute and throw the football against the Gamecocks this weekend? I think that's what a lot of Gamecock people are hoping against hope.
No, they're not going to get cute. They're not going to do anything that they haven't done in the past. But the Gamecocks do have the ability to take away the run and make them throw it. So if they want to commit, the additional safeties in the box there and bring those linebackers up nice and tight, that will force Georgia to work a lot harder. And in that case, if you want to give Jake Fromm those one-on-one matchups on the outside, he's going to try to take advantage of it. Now, with Sky Moore doing what he's doing, I could definitely see a situation where maybe they get an interception or two, but they're not going to change their game plan until someone makes them change the game plan, and they're going to take what the defense gives them and try to score that way. I mean, Georgia can't throw it. We saw that against Missouri, where Missouri lined up and took away the run, and Jake Fromm threw for over 300 yards when he had to. So he's got the ability. It's just I don't know that they actually should game plan away from what they've been doing.
Georgia's loaded, and the Dogs are rolling right now. 8-0 overall, 5-0 in the SEC, and number 2 in the AP poll that's out this week, and a good chance that the Dogs might be number 1 in the college football playoff rankings, which come out tonight as we record on this Tuesday. Emerson Phillips here on Gamecock Central Radio, joined by Radi Nabulsi, the publisher of UGAsports.com, and Roddy's bringing us the Georgia Bulldog perspective heading into Saturday's matchup between the hedges. Roddy, talking about Georgia, they ran the football for 336 yards against the Gamecocks in Columbia last year. I think Gamecock fans and players and coaches alike feel like the Gamecocks are better against the run this year, but it sure seems like Georgia is better running the football this year. So I don't know realistically what kind of hope there is that South Carolina is going to be able to slow down the Georgia running attack. But for the sake of argument, Roddy, if the Gamecocks are able to slow down Georgia just a little bit and make this a fourth-quarter ball game, does that play into South Carolina's hands at all, or is there perfect confidence in Fromm to be able to win a close game in the fourth quarter?
If it were last year, I would say no. But right now, this team has so much faith in Jake Fromm. It kind of reminds me of how South Carolina felt about Connor Shaw. It's just, he's such a leader. Even though he's young, and this is only his first year, these guys really believe in him, and he has a lot of offensive weapons. I mean, you've got a couple 5-star wide receivers to throw to. You've got a 5-star tight end. I mean, right now Georgia's tight ends are hardly ever getting any passes because Georgia's just not throwing it a whole lot. But if you have to get in that fourth quarter and throw to Isaac Nada, the one of the top tight ends in the last 4 or 5 years, that looks good for Georgia. And again, I think for Georgia to lose this game, they're going to have to make some mistakes. They're going to have to give South Carolina some short fields, miss tackles, and they have not missed tackles this year. I mean, the difference between this year and last year in Georgia's defense, there are very few yards after contact. They have not given up a lot of yak yardage, if you will. And right now, when it comes to offensively, last year they could run the ball well. They did well against South Carolina, but there are many games in which they could not. This year, no one's been able to stop them running, and that's a testament to what Sam Pittman has done with that offensive line. He's got 3 new starters, and those guys are young and inexperienced, but they are playing lights out.
Everybody's talking about the Georgia ground game right now, Nick Chubb, Sonny Michel, and that powerful Georgia ground attack, but the Georgia defense has been lights out this year for the most part as well. Notre Dame had run the football for over 300 yards a game against just about everybody they played, but Georgia shut them down up at Notre Dame back in the second week of the season, and the Georgia defense is outstanding as well. Tell us about that unit.
Yeah, speaking of Notre Dame, they've run for over 300 yards in every game and 400 yards in a number of their games, but against Georgia they picked up 55, and that's with some NFL caliber tackles, a left guard and left tackle over there, and Georgia's defense has been insane. The way they make you one-dimensional, you're not going to be able to run on them. You're going to have to throw, and even then, they're going to bring pressure. They're going to get to your quarterback, and if you do complete a pass, you're not going to pick up 25, 35 yards unless you throw it that far. You're not going to be able to do what Georgia's been doing, throw a 5-yard pass, have your wide receiver run for 20, 30 yards before you bring him down. Those guys tackle immediately. They don't miss a whole lot. It's been I can't remember the last time I've seen something like this. It had to be maybe 2002 when Georgia won the SEC title, since they've been able to tackle that well. They bring pressure, they collapse pockets, and they're disciplined. I mean, there's been plenty of situations where you watch say Davin Bellamy, the outside linebacker, he's on the left side. In years past, I think he would have crashed in and, in his effort to get to the quarterback, but now he holds back in a containment situation, trusting the other guys in the interior and the far side to get to the quarterback or take away the run or whatever. And they've played very disciplined football. And the turnaround from year 1 to year 2, I mean, they only lost one starter. They have 10 of 11 guys back. But this team looks light years further advanced than they were last year. It's just been amazing, that turnaround. And if they had a bunch of new guys, it would make a lot more sense. But right now, it's just they learned to tackle. So it's been fun to watch. The Georgia fans are really enjoying this defense.
This will be the 70th meeting between South Carolina and Georgia, and the Gamecocks have only faced the Clemson Tigers more than they've played Georgia, 49-18 with 2 ties. Georgia's got the all-time series lead. The Dogs lead the all-time series in Athens, 28-8. Only 8 Gamecock victories all-time in Athens. And, Roddy, some of those are some of the biggest wins in Gamecock history. Some of the more memorable moments in Gamecock football history have been wins in Athens. There haven't been a lot of them, though. So 22.5 points is what the line opened up at, and it's already gone to over 24. I saw 24.5 this morning. A buddy of mine here in Columbia said he wouldn't bet a stick of gum on that game. He didn't know about that line. A lot of folks kind of scratching their head. Everybody figured Georgia would be a double-digit favorite, maybe a 14, even a 17-point favorite. But I don't think anybody thought that the line would open that big and then shoot over 24, which it's already done. Roddy, it could be 27 or 8 by the time kickoff rolls around if current betting lines continue. And I know that you take that with a grain of salt. That's based on the public's perception of what's going to happen. But based on the way Georgia's been blowing people out, Vegas is saying that 14-17 not nearly enough right now for the Dogs to be favored by.
And that blows my mind. I mean, again, I know I just made the point that last year's defense and this year's defense are like 2 completely different squads, even though it's 10 of the same players. But historically, this game, you can have the spreads don't matter in this game. No one ever gets it right unless you predict a very close game. There's 23, 24 guys on that South Carolina squad who are Peach State natives.
That's right.
They're going to come to Athens and actually, play with a chip on their shoulder. Will Muschamp's a hell of a coach. He knows Kirby probably better than anybody. So he also knows Jim Chaney and Mel Tucker. So he knows the offensive defensive coordinators. He knows their tendencies. They're going to do their research and know what Georgia likes to do. Georgia hasn't really hit anything in the last few games, so Georgia's going to try to come up and line up and run it down the throats, and Will Muschamp's going to stop them. I don't see Georgia scoring 4 more touchdowns, or 4 more touchdowns, or 3 touchdowns and a couple field goals more than South Carolina. Is it possible the way they're playing? Yeah, right now Georgia's playing lights out, but can they keep it up again in a grudge match like this?
Yeah.
I mean, look at the teams they've beaten. Going before that Florida game, they'd beaten Kentucky, Missouri, Vanderbilt. Those teams at the time were 0-12 in the SEC East. It's not exactly a murderer's row. They had App State, okay, not exactly a powerhouse. They had Samford, who I didn't even know had a football team. Mississippi State, they beat quite handily. Mississippi State looked better, but Mississippi State also lost by 39 to Auburn. So the only real good team they played was Notre Dame, and again, they won by 1 point after making a bunch of dumb mistakes. So then they took on a Florida team who was in absolute disarray and fired their coach immediately thereafter. So to me, I think that the South Carolina, Kentucky, Auburn, Georgia Tech, that foursome of games is going to tell us a lot more about this football team than the first 8 games did. Georgia is capable of winning big, but this isn't Tennessee they're taking on. This isn't Vanderbilt. This isn't Stanford. This is South Carolina. And those guys have a chip on their shoulder, as well they should. I've covered most of those guys in recruiting, and there's a lot of talented players there who are not going to like the fact that they're able to lose by 24 points.
Yeah. Interesting that Georgia's strength of schedule not great outside of that road win at Notre Dame in the second week of the season. The Gamecocks are in a similar boat right now. Going into last weekend, all of the SEC opponents that the Gamecocks had beaten, none of them had won a conference game. It was Missouri, Arkansas, Tennessee, and none of them had won a conference game. Arkansas broke through and won one last week, but then the Gamecocks beat Vandy, and Vandy's winless in SEC play. So you can make an argument that outside of NC State, the Gamecocks really don't have any quality wins either. So kind of an interesting sidebar going into this game. Roddy, it feels to me like the Gamecocks are playing with house money here. If Carolina gets blown out, I don't think that's going to surprise a lot of people. And Gamecock fans will be disappointed if that happens, and players and coaches, obviously, but I don't think anybody would be completely shocked. So it feels like the Gamecocks have got nothing to lose this weekend, and I think South Carolina is very happy to be playing in a big game in the East standings this weekend where, Georgia's got a chance. We talked about it before the podcast today. Georgia can't clinch the East, but they can put themselves right on the cusp of clinching, and playing at home is obviously going to be a big advantage for the Dogs. So a huge ball game between the Gamecocks and Bulldogs this weekend. Roddy, should be fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a situation where they could tie for part of the East title. Then all they need is either to beat Auburn or for Kentucky to lose, and they'll have won the East for the first time in 5 years, 6 years. It's been a long time since Georgia's been back to Atlanta. That was the thing that the East has been wide open for the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And when you get Missouri winning back to back, and then McElwain winning it twice in 2 years, that's what got Mark Richt fired, was the inability for an established coach, going into years 12, 13, 14, and 15 to not win a down SEC East. South Carolina's had a coaching change, and Missouri's had a coaching change. Florida's now had a coaching change. It's been a weak time for the division.
Yep. And
now Georgia has a chance to win it. But you got to think that come this year, while Muschamp rebuilding and Kirby's putting his pieces in place, we're looking at coaching changes at Florida and Tennessee. I think that the conference is now going to come down to the next 2-3 years who wins the Georgia-South Carolina game. I don't see Kentucky being a huge historically they've not been that good. It's not going to be Vanderbilt. Tennessee has to rebuild, Florida has to rebuild, and Missouri's just terrible. So I can really see this game, this is kind of a preview of what will become over the next few years the key to winning the East, the Georgia-South Carolina game.
Roddy, you just made a lot of our listeners smile. We appreciate your time today. Thanks very much.
My pleasure. Take care.
All right, that's Radi Nabulsi, the publisher of UGAsports.com, and he brings us the Georgia perspective today on Gamecock Central Radio. I'm Emerson Phillips, 3:30 kick, Saturday in Athens on CBS. Thanks for being with us.